So when I was 17 years old, I was in a juvenile detention center. And there was one very specific kind of pivotal moment in my experience of serving a 6-month sentence in that correctional institution that has kind of carried me through my entire life since then. And I had gotten into trouble, which is very common in this type of setting. And as my punishment, I was locked in my cell, which is like concrete kind of cinder blocks, on a metal bed with no mattress, no blankets. They take all of your belongings out of the room. So you're just wearing your clothes, what you have on, which is, you know, a blue pair of sweatpants and a white t-shirt and a blue sweatshirt. And the punishment was for 72 hours. So I was alone in the cell by myself for 72 hours. And somewhere around on the second day, I remember very clearly and feel it in my body still, sitting in the corner of the cell, kind of huddled into the brick wall on the metal bed, wondering how I got here. What were all of the steps in my life that brought me to that place? And after 20 years of therapy and reflection, I came to understand through yoga philosophy that what had happened was that I had created my external world to mirror what I was feeling on the inside. And on the inside, I was feeling very alone and isolated and feeling like nobody understood. And so this pivotal moment in my life, I was experiencing that fully and completely. And I remember just feeling like so shattered and just kind of crying out from the depths of my soul. Like, what am I going to do? I think I might have said the F word in there somewhere. But what the F am I going to do with my life? It was a couple of weeks before my 18th birthday, and you may or may not know, once you turn 18, you know, the option of probation and being tried in youth court and all of that stuff kind of vanishes, and then you're in real trouble. And I knew that was not the purpose of my life. I knew that my life was more than that. And I started to just cry out, what am I going to do with my life? And in that moment, a radiant white light appeared that I saw very clearly. And the warmth and energy of that light radiated and filled the entire room. This is the part. Because that light was my brother. And in that moment, I was taken back to the time when he died, when I was 4 years old. So that second pivotal moment of manifesting all of what I was feeling, I had realized started in that moment when I was 4 years old. My brother was 6, and he was got hit by a car riding his bike across the street. Just a freak accident. An elderly woman was driving and had a heart attack while she was driving, and he just died on the way to the hospital. So at 4 years old, I didn't have an intellectual understanding of what was happening, but my sensory perception and my intuitive connection to what was happening was so fiercely strong. Now, I was a child that was very connected spiritually from a very young age. And after my brother died, the day I remember so clearly, I started dreaming about my brother. And he would come to me in my dreams. I would see him. I would play with him very visibly in my day-to-day interactions. And something really profound happened through that process, through the grief-stricken environment that I was in, my parents and extended family. I learned very, very quickly that my experiences with my brother and these encounters and dreams that I was having were not really to be talked about, were not really to be accepted. People didn't understand what I was saying. And I remember very clearly being at my brother's funeral and wondering, why is everybody so sad? And I was sitting next to my auntie, and she'd said, well, little Dennis is gone. He's gone to heaven. And I'm like, no, he's not. He's right there. He's right there. And this is stuff that I never talked about. After the age of 5 or 6, I'm pretty sure that what I did looking back, I just shut down and felt my experiences were no longer valid, that what I had to say wasn't going to be accepted, that what I was sharing or what I was feeling was somehow wrong or was going to hurt other people or cause pain in the people around me. And that's not something that I wanted to do, so I stopped talking about it. And I kind of separated myself from the experiences that I was having. What that did was send me on a life, kind of like a spiral in my life at that time. I was a straight A student on the basketball team, captain of the volleyball team, cheerleader, had lots of friends, really popular. And when I was about 12, things started to shift. I kind of just stopped, really caring. And I began to hang out with different kids, began to not really care so much about my homework, started to kind of disengage from all of the normal kind of perfected things that I had learned to do to keep everybody around me happy, and started just really not giving a shit anymore. That started a process of addiction for me from about 12 to 13, drinking alcohol and smoking pot. By the time I was 16, I was completely physically and psychologically dependent on barbiturates, so prescription pills. I was living on my own. I had moved out from my mom's. I lived with my dad, moved out from my dad, and I kind of spent this 4-year period in and out of juvie and correctional facilities and rehab and group homes, and just kind of bounced around, did whatever I wanted, and thought, this is just how life is going to be. Underneath that, I knew that it was temporary. I knew that this was not all that my life was going to be. And so I just kind of settled into that as a coping mechanism for feeling powerless, for feeling unheard, for feeling like people didn't acknowledge my voice, for feeling like the things that I was experiencing on the inside, nobody else around me seemed to understand. And coming back to that pivotal moment when I was 17 years old, just a few weeks before my 18th birthday, when I was going to be released from serving this sentence, I remembered that. And it was like I had forgotten. And it was in that moment that I recommitted myself to living authentically and figuring out what this was, and knowing that if the people that were around me at this point in time, in the place that I was in my life, if it wasn't working and I wasn't getting what I needed to go. And so I got out of that institution and I moved clear across the country by myself at 18 years old with 2 suitcases of clothes, because at that time I thought you needed a lot of clothes. And I had $50 in my bank account. I skimmed it down over the years of traveling to just one backpack with everything that I owned. But I moved out there and I went to school. It didn't get great right away. It got a little bit worse before it got better. But for the suffice of today's talk, I went back to school. I did my upgrading. I took all of the credits that I needed to take to get into university so I could become a social worker. And then that's what I did. And I started working very early on in my education, because Canada is very progressive in how they educate you. So my first year of social work, I was already working in a group home setting. And I was working with teenage girls who were just like me, just 3 years before. I worked in treatment centers for severely abused children, ages 12 and under. I worked in the mental health and disability field for 6 years in varying roles and capacities. Lots of alternative programs that focused on reintegration of people with mental illness back into society. And that was where I realized how passionate I really was about mental health, about self-care, about understanding who we are as beings and what we're really seeking in our life. And I realized very quickly into my career that I wasn't going to be able to affect the kind of change that I felt called to affect in the setting that I was in. My last job in Canada was working in a psychiatric hospital in an outpatient program where I was the coordinator of this program where I taught job skills and volunteer skills to adults who had just been released from jail or hospital. And I realized that I was not that different from the people that I was working with. I realized that I thought the same way that they did, and they got labeled as having schizophrenia, and I didn't. I got labeled as they got so many labels and put into so many boxes and so much medication. And to me, I just saw very clearly that it wasn't the whole problem. There was something missing. And so I quit my job and moved to India and started studying yoga and meditation and philosophy. The reason why I felt called to do that is because I had been practicing yoga and meditation in my own life. And it healed me of insomnia, of anxiety, of depression, of dependency on substances, just to manage my day-to-day life. And yoga really paved a way. Like many people, I started with doing meditation, then started with the asana, and then I realized that there's something more here, so I need to go figure out what it is. And over the last 10 years, that's all that I've been doing.